In the forgotten shadows of Puerto Esperanza, where rumors of ancient curses and civic corruption intertwined like vines, a solitary man made a decision that would forever alter not only his life but the very soul of the town itself. Miguel Fuentes, a towering construction worker with gentle eyes and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of others' burdens, discovered Elena Navarro, 8 months pregnant and buried in a shallow grave beneath the new municipal building site. Their paths crossed for exactly 7 days before Miguel uncovered a conspiracy so vast and terrifying, it would shatter everything he thought he knew about justice, power, and the extraordinary lengths one must go to protect the innocent. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, we've saved something truly special just for you. The summer heat pressed down on Puerto Esperanza like a heavy blanket, the air thick with moisture from the nearby coast. Miguel Fuentes wiped sweat from his brow as he guided the excavator's bucket into the earth, digging the foundation for what would become the town's celebrated new municipal building. At 35, his face already carried the weathered lines of a man who had spent too many years laboring under the merciless sun, his dreams gradually buried beneath the structures he helped create. Miguel wasn't born to hardship. His father, Javier Fuentes, had once owned a respectable construction company that specialized in residential homes just outside the town center. Those days felt like another lifetime now. Miguel could still remember the smell of his mother's arroz con pollo simmering on the stove, the sound of his father's booming laughter as they measured and cut lumber together in the yard behind their modest but comfortable home. But the economic crash had come first, followed by his father's gambling debts. By the time Miguel turned 28, he had buried both parents, his mother from a heart condition the family couldn't afford to treat properly, and his father from the bottle that had become his only solace. The bank had taken everything else, every nail, every tool, every blueprint, sold to cover debts his father had kept hidden from the family. A man's word is his bond, Javier Fuentes used to say, so Miguel had spent 7 years working off his father's remaining debts, taking whatever construction jobs would pay, dangerous demolition work others refused, overnight shifts in storm-damaged areas, repairs in neighborhoods where gunshots were as common as birdsong. Now he lived in a cramped apartment above Ramirez's bodega, in the poorest section of Puerto Esperanza, trading maintenance work for reduced rent and whatever meals Señora Ramirez felt charitable enough to provide. His worldly possessions fit into a single duffel bag: 3 shirts, 2 pairs of worn jeans, his father's watch that kept unreliable time, and a dog-eared copy of 100 Years of Solitude, that his schoolteacher mother had insisted he keep. "Reading will take you places your hands cannot build," she told him. Miguel couldn't help but think she'd be disappointed to see how far he hadn't gone. On this particular afternoon, Miguel had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the municipal building site. The pay was decent, $15 an hour plus an occasional meal, but as he packed up his personal tools, he knew the money wouldn't stretch far. Hurricane season was approaching, and he had nothing saved for the inevitable work stoppage that would follow. Puerto Esperanza wasn't much of a town, just a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the backdrop of distant mountains and the ever-present sea. Main Street consisted of Ramirez's bodega, a small clinic that was only open 3 days a week, the old church that doubled as an emergency shelter during storms, and a handful of other businesses barely keeping their doors open. The air smelled of salt, fried food, and the occasional sweet scent of jasmine, from Doña Lucia's tiny garden behind the laundromat. Miguel secured his tools in the lockbox and nodded goodbye to the other workers. Unlike them, he didn't have a family waiting at home, no children to embrace him, no partner to share his burdens. He walked slowly, his massive frame casting a long shadow, as the sun began its descent. At 6'6", and built like the foundations he poured, Miguel had earned the nickname El Gigante among the locals. Despite his intimidating size, children followed him like ducklings, enchanted by his gentle manner and the small wooden toys he sometimes carved for them from construction scraps. "Fuentes!" A voice called out as Miguel passed the town's only bar, a dingy establishment called El Faro. Carlos Mendoza, the site foreman, waved him over. "Join me for a drink." "You look like you need it." Miguel hesitated. Carlos wasn't known for his generosity, and any invitation from him usually came with strings attached. Still, the prospect of a cold beer on a hot day, was too tempting to refuse. The interior of El Faro was dim and smelled of stale beer and cigarettes. A few patrons hunched over their drinks, lost in private thoughts or quiet conversations. Carlos was already seated at the bar, a glass of whiskey in front of him. ¿Cerveza? Carlos asked, as Miguel settled onto the stool beside him, the wood creaking under his weight. Gracias, Miguel nodded, accepting the beer the bartender slid toward him. Carlos lowered his voice, leaning closer. Listen, Fuentes, there's something you should know. The mayor's office called today. They're sending inspectors tomorrow. Miguel frowned. The municipal building project had been plagued with rumors of cut corners and substandard materials. What for? We passed inspection last month. This isn't about code compliance, Carlos said, his eyes darting around the bar to ensure no one was listening. It's about what we found this morning after you left. In the north corner excavation. Miguel's confusion must have shown on his face because Carlos continued in an even lower voice. A bone, Fuentes. A human bone. And before you ask, no, it wasn't from the old cemetery, that's on the other side of town. The beer turned bitter in Miguel's mouth. Did you call the police? Carlos laughed, a short, harsh sound. The police? In this town? The mayor himself came down and told us to fill in that section immediately. Said it was probably just an old unmarked grave from colonial times. Nothing to worry about. And you believed him? Miguel asked, setting his beer down. What I believe doesn't matter, Carlos replied. What matters is that we have jobs. The mayor promised a bonus to everyone who keeps quiet. $5,000 each when the building is completed. $5,000. The amount hung in the air between them. For Miguel, it represented freedom from debt, perhaps even a fresh start somewhere else. But human remains? Something felt deeply wrong. What exactly did you see, Carlos? Miguel pressed. The foreman drained his whiskey, signaling for another. Nothing much, just part of what looked like an arm bone. The mayor had it removed before anyone could take a closer look, said he'd handle the proper authorities. Carlos shrugged. Look, Fuentes, I know you're a straight arrow, but sometimes in this life, you need to know when to look the other way. Miguel said nothing, his mind racing. Puerto Esperanza's current mayor, Alejandro Vega, had campaigned on promises of modernization and progress. The municipal building was to be his crowning achievement, a symbol of the town's emergence from decades of neglect and poverty. Construction had begun unusually quickly after his election, permits and approvals granted with suspicious speed. There's more, Carlos added after a long silence. They're reassigning you tomorrow. You'll be working on the South Side Foundation instead. Mayor's orders. Away from the north corner, Miguel observed. Carlos nodded. Like I said, $5,000. Think about it. He clapped Miguel on the shoulder and stood. See you tomorrow. Early. After Carlos left, Miguel remained at the bar, nursing his beer. The bartender, an old man named Mateo, who had owned El Faro for 30 years, moved closer. Trouble at the site? He asked, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. Maybe, Miguel replied. Did you know they found human remains today? Mateo's hand stilled. Where exactly? North corner. Near where the old clinic used to be. The bartender's expression darkened. That land has history, son. Bad history. Before the mayor bought it for his fancy new building, it belonged to the Navarro family for generations. They didn't want to sell, but somehow the mayor convinced them. He leaned closer. Or so the official story goes. What's the unofficial story? Miguel asked. Mateo glanced toward the door, then back at Miguel. Elena Navarro, the daughter, she was vocal about keeping the land, said her family had protected it for reasons beyond money. Then one day, about 4 months ago, she just disappeared. Pregnant too, nearly 5 months along. The mayor said she'd moved to the capital for better medical care, showed some paperwork to prove it. But nobody saw her leave. Nobody's heard from her since. A chill ran down Miguel's spine despite the bar's heat. And the rest of the family sold the land 2 weeks after she left. Now they live in a nice new house on the hill. Don't talk much to anyone anymore. Mateo shook his head. Strange times in Puerto Esperanza, son. Strange times. Miguel paid for his beer and stepped out into the evening air, his mind troubled. The north corner of the construction site, where they'd found the bone, was precisely where the old Navarro house had stood before demolition. The timing of Elena's disappearance, the quick sale of family land, and now human remains, it painted a disturbing picture. Back in his small apartment, Miguel couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. He paced the limited floor space, remembering Elena Navarro. She'd been a few years younger than him, always with a book in hand, quiet but determined. They'd never been friends, but in a town as small as Puerto Esperanza, everyone knew everyone. The thought of her vanishing, especially while carrying a child, gnawed at him. Making a decision, Miguel grabbed his flashlight and a small shovel he used for his container garden on the fire escape. If what Carlos said was true, the mayor had ordered that section filled in, evidence buried under tons of dirt and eventually concrete. By tomorrow, whatever was there would be inaccessible forever. The construction site was poorly secured, with only a chain-link fence, and a single night watchman who was known to sleep through his shift. Miguel easily slipped past, his dark clothes blending with the shadows. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate between stacks of materials and equipment. The north corner excavation had indeed been partially filled, but not completely. Miguel could see where fresh dirt had been hastily dumped over the area. Setting his flashlight on a nearby concrete block, he began to dig carefully, removing the loose soil. After 20 minutes of steady work, his shovel struck something solid. Dropping to his knees, Miguel began clearing away dirt with his hands. What he uncovered made his blood freeze: a human hand, partially decomposed but unmistakable, with a distinctive silver ring on one finger. He recognized that ring. Elena Navarro had always worn it, a family heirloom, she'd once told him, passed down from her grandmother. Heart-pounding, Miguel continued clearing away soil, revealing more of what was clearly a human body. The horror of what he was finding threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to continue. As he exposed more of the shallow grave, the full terrible truth became apparent. Elena Navarro had been buried here, and from the swell of her abdomen, she had still been pregnant. But what made Miguel gasp, what sent him stumbling backward in shock, was the realization that the ground around her face showed signs of having been scratched from the inside. Elena hadn't been dead when she was buried. She had been alive, fighting for breath beneath the suffocating earth. As the enormity of the discovery washed over him, Miguel heard a faint sound, so soft he thought he'd imagined it. He froze, listening intently. There it was again. A weak fluttering movement from Elena's abdomen. Impossible. It had to be his imagination. Or perhaps small animals had found the grave. But Miguel found himself placing a trembling hand on Elena's distended belly. What he felt defied belief. A kick, unmistakable and deliberate. Somehow, protected within its mother's body, Elena's unborn child was still alive. Miguel's mind raced. How long had Elena been buried? Mateo had said she disappeared 4 months ago, but the condition of her body suggested a more recent burial. Perhaps she'd been kept somewhere else first, only buried after her death, or what someone had assumed was her death. The medical impossibility of what he was feeling worked with the undeniable evidence beneath his palm. The child lived, against all odds, protected by its mother's body, even as she had perished. What happened next was pure instinct. Miguel removed his shirt, gently wrapping it around Elena's abdomen. With a silent prayer, he made a decision that would forever alter the course of not only his life, but the very fabric of Puerto Esperanza itself. Using his pocket knife, he carefully, reverently, performed an emergency cesarean section on Elena's body. The baby that slipped into his massive, calloused hands was tiny but perfect. A girl, silent at first, then letting out a weak cry as the night air touched her skin for the first time. Miguel cradled her against his chest, wrapping her in his undershirt, tears streaming down his face at the miracle and horror of what had transpired. "I've got you, little one," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you." But as the first flood of relief washed over him, the reality of his situation crashed down. He held in his arms living evidence of a murder, a child who should not exist, whose mother had been buried alive by someone with enough power to cover it up. In saving this teeny life, Miguel had placed them both in mortal danger. The sound of an approaching vehicle jolted him to action. Gently placing the newborn inside his tool bag, cushioning her with his spare shirt, Miguel quickly reburied Elena's body, ensuring he left the grave exactly as he had found it. With one last glance at the disturbed earth that held Elena Navarro's remains, he whispered a promise, to her, to himself, and to the child now in his care. "I will protect her. And I will make sure they pay for what they've done to you." As Miguel slipped away from the construction site, the tiny life nestled against his chest, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The gentle giant of Puerto Esperanza had uncovered a truth so dark, so horrifying, that it would shake the very foundations of the town, and he alone stood between an innocent child and those who would wish her erased from existence. The weight of this responsibility settled on his broad shoulders as he disappeared into the night, the first tendrils of dawn just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. In saving this child, Miguel Fuentes had set in motion events that would expose the corruption festering at the heart of Puerto Esperanza, and would test the limits of his courage, resourcefulness, and the fierce protective love that had awakened within him the moment he held her in his hands. Creating and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means the world to us. Now, back to Miguel's impossible situation. Miguel's apartment suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for a newborn. As he carefully placed the baby on his bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling, the enormity of what he had done, and what lay ahead, threatened to overwhelm him. The infant was impossibly small, her skin with a slightly bluish tinge that worried him deeply. She needed medical attention, but who could he trust? Dr. Isabella Reyes had been Miguel's mother's friend years ago, operating the small clinic on the outskirts of town. Although officially retired, she still treated patients in her home for those who couldn't afford the newer medical center. If anyone would help without asking too many dangerous questions, it would be her. Wrapping the baby carefully in a clean towel, Miguel slipped out of his apartment and made his way through the pre-dawn streets. Puerto Esperanza was still sleeping, only the occasional stray dog or early fisherman, staring in the gray light. Dr. Reyes lived in a modest house near the old lighthouse, its blue shutters distinguishing it from neighboring homes. Miguel knocked softly, then more urgently, when no answer came. Finally, a light flickered on inside, and the door opened to reveal Isabella Reyes, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, eyes sharp, despite being roused from sleep. "Miguel Fuentes," she said, recognition dawning on her face. "What brings you?" Her question died as she noticed the bundle in his arms. "Come in. Quickly." Once inside, Miguel unwrapped the infant, his hands shaking. "She needs help, Dr. Reyes. I don't know what to do." Isabella's professional demeanor took over immediately. She took the baby, placing her on the kitchen table that was hastily cleared of books and papers. "How old is she? Where is the mother?" "She was just born. Maybe an hour ago," Miguel said, then hesitated. "The mother? She's dead." Isabella's hands stilled momentarily as she examined the tiny infant. "This child is premature, probably around 32 weeks. She's hypothermic and likely hypoglycemic." She looked up at Miguel, her gaze penetrating. "Who delivered her?" "I did," Miguel admitted, then, realizing the impossibility of hiding the truth from someone who might be the baby's only chance at survival, he continued. "I found her mother buried, at the construction site, the municipal building project. She, Elena Navarro. She was already dead, but I felt the baby move." Isabella's face drained of color. "Elena, buried. She shook her head in disbelief, but her hands never stopped working, efficiently checking the baby's vital signs. Miguel, do you understand what you're saying? What you're implying? I know exactly what I'm saying, Miguel replied, his voice low but firm. Elena was buried in a shallow grave, where her family's house used to stand. From the marks around her face and hands, I think she was alive when they put her there. The doctor closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. Elena came to me about 5 months ago. She was pregnant and afraid. Wouldn't tell me who the father was, but said powerful people wanted her to take care of it. I helped her arrange prenatal care in the capital, but she never went to her appointment there. She looked at the infant, now wrapped in a warm blanket. I assumed she'd found another solution. Not this. Never this. As Isabella worked, preparing a makeshift incubator from a large plastic container and hot water bottles, Miguel paced the small kitchen. What do we do now? If the mayor was involved, we don't know that, Isabella cautioned, though her expression suggested she had her suspicions. The construction crew found remains today. Yesterday now, the mayor came personally and ordered everything covered up. Offered bribes for silence, Miguel countered. Elena's family suddenly has a new house and doesn't talk to anyone. What more proof do we need? Isabella inserted a tiny feeding tube with practiced precision. Evidence, Miguel. Proof that would stand in court. Right now, all we have is a premature baby and your word about where you found her. She connected a syringe of sugar water to the tube. And speaking of the baby, she needs a hospital. I can stabilize her, but she requires specialized care I can't provide her. We can take her to the hospital, Miguel said immediately. They'll ask questions. Word will get back to the mayor. Then she may not survive, Isabella stated bluntly. I'm doing what I can, but she's very premature. Without proper medical care, the unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. Miguel looked at the tiny life fighting so hard to survive, thought of her mother who had died alone in the dark, and made a decision. We need to document everything first, he said. Evidence that can't be buried or bought off. Then we get her to a hospital outside Puerto Esperanza. Isabella nodded slowly. I have a camera. And I can take blood samples from the baby. If we can exhume Elena's body properly, DNA testing would prove the relationship. She hesitated. But Miguel, this is dangerous. Mayor Vega has connections throughout the region. If he's involved in this, then he's a murderer who buried a pregnant woman alive, Miguel finished, his gentle nature hardening into resolve. And I won't let him get away with it, no matter what it costs me. Over the next few hours, Isabella did everything possible to stabilize the infant while Miguel carefully documented their impromptu medical intervention with the doctor's digital camera. They worked in tense silence, both aware that each passing minute increased the risk of discovery. As dawn broke fully over Puerto Esperanza, Isabella finally stepped back from the makeshift incubator. She's stronger than she looks, she said, a note of admiration in her voice. Her breathing has stabilized, and she's taking the sugar water. But she still needs proper medical care, preferably within the next 24 hours. Miguel nodded, watching the tiny chest rise and fall. I have a cousin in San Cristobal, about 4 hours from here. She works as a nurse. Could you write instructions for her? I'll do better than that, Isabella replied, determination etching new lines in her weathered face. I'm coming with you. This child is my responsibility too. I should have done more for Elena when she came to me. She began gathering supplies. But first, we need more evidence. The kind that can be disputed or buried. We need to go back to the site, Miguel agreed. Tonight, after work. I need to act normal today, not raise suspicions. Isabella considered this. That's wise. I'll care for the baby today. You go to work as usual. Observe who comes and goes. What they're saying. Tonight, we'll document Elena's grave properly. She hesitated. The baby needs a name, Miguel. We can't keep calling her the baby. Miguel looked at the tiny infant, her face peaceful in sleep. Esperanza, he said softly. It means hope. Isabella finished with a sad smile. Esperanza Navarro. No, Miguel corrected gently. Just Esperanza for now. Her last name might put her in danger until we know the full truth. As Miguel prepared to leave for his regular shift, washing away all evidence of the night's activities, Isabella placed a hand on his arm. You did a brave thing, Miguel. Terrible but brave. Not many would have had the courage. It wasn't courage, he replied honestly. I just couldn't walk away. That, said Isabella, is the definition of courage in a town where everyone else has learned to look the other way. The construction site was buzzing with activity when Miguel arrived, deliberately a few minutes late, to avoid seeming eager. As Carlos had predicted, he was immediately reassigned to the South Foundation, far from where he had made his grisly discovery the night before. Throughout the morning, Miguel worked steadily, keeping his head down but his eyes and ears open. Mayor Alejandro Vega arrived around noon, immaculately dressed in a light suit despite the heat, his silver hair perfectly styled. He spoke briefly with Carlos and the project manager, his smile never reaching his eyes as he surveyed the progress. When his gaze fell on Miguel, there was a moment of assessment, quickly masked by political warmth. Fuentes, isn't it? The mayor called, approaching with extended hand. Carlos tells me you're one of our hardest workers. Miguel straightened, towering over the politician, and accepted the handshake. Just doing my job, sir. We appreciate that dedication, Vega replied smoothly. This building represents the future of Puerto Esperanza. Progress requires sacrifice, but the rewards will be worth it for everyone. His emphasis on everyone carried unmistakable weight. $5,000 worth? Miguel asked, his tone carefully neutral. Something flickered behind the mayor's eyes. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. Carlos mentioned our completion bonus, I see. Yes, for those who help us meet our accelerated timeline. He smiled again, all teeth. Family man like you could use that kind of money, I imagine. I live alone, actually, Miguel replied. Ah, well, even better. Complete freedom to enjoy the fruits of your labor. The mayor clapped him on the shoulder. Keep up the good work, Fuentes. As Vega walked away, Miguel noticed him pause briefly at the north corner, now completely filled in and leveled, ready for foundation pouring scheduled for the next day. The mayor's expression remained pleasant, but Miguel caught the slight relaxation of his shoulders as he confirmed the site was secure. The rest of the day passed in a blur of physical labor and hypervigilance. Miguel noted which workers seemed to know about the bonus, and which remained oblivious. He catalogued the unusual number of visits from city officials, each finding a reason to inspect the north corner. By the time his shift ended, Miguel's muscles ached not just from work but from the constant tension of maintaining a normal facade. Instead of heading directly back to Isabella's house, Miguel made a deliberate detour to Ramirez's bodega, purchasing food and supplies a single man might need. He chatted briefly with Señora Ramirez, mentioning plans to visit his cousin in San Cristobal for a few days, establishing an alibi for his upcoming absence. Only after he was certain no one was following him did Miguel make his way to Isabella's house through a circuitous road. The doctor admitted him quickly, leading him to the back bedroom where the makeshift incubator now sat beside her bed. How is she? Miguel asked, peering at the tiny form. Fighting, Isabella replied. Her breathing is stronger, and she's taking more formula. I've improvised a feeding system. She showed him a small tube connected to a syringe. But we're running out of time. We need to move her to proper facilities soon. Miguel nodded, setting down the supplies he'd brought. Tonight then. After we document Elena's grave, we leave for San Cristobal. I've been thinking, Isabella said hesitantly. Elena deserves a proper burial, not to be sealed under that building's foundation forever, if we're going to document the grave properly. We need to recover her body, Miguel finished. I've been thinking the same thing. It's the only way to preserve the evidence and give her dignity. As night fell over Puerto Esperanza, Miguel and Isabella prepared for their grim task. The doctor had arranged for a trusted former patient to care for baby Esperanza. For the few hours they would be gone. Miguel gathered tools, a tarp, and his documentation equipment. Once we do this, Isabella warned as they prepared to leave, there's no going back. We'll be fugitives in our own town until the truth comes out, if it ever does. Miguel looked at the tiny baby, thought of Elena Navarro scratching at her grave from the inside, and felt his resolve harden. Some truths can't stay buried, he said simply. No matter how much dirt they pile on top. Under the cover of darkness they made their way to the construction site. The night watchman was easily avoided. Miguel knew his routine, the hourly circuit that always included a 15-minute coffee break in the site office. Once inside the fence, they moved quickly to the north corner, now smooth and prepared for tomorrow's concrete pour. Working silently but efficiently, Miguel removed the fresh field dirt, while Isabella documented each layer with her camera. It took nearly an hour to reach the depth where he had found Elena the night before. When they uncovered her body, Isabella had to stifle a cry of distress. Elena Navarro had been beautiful in life, dark hair, thoughtful eyes, always with a book or notebook in hand. In death, her features were distorted by the horror of her final moments, her fingers bloody from trying to claw her way out of the grave. Isabella, despite the decades of medical practice, had to turn away momentarily. She was alive, the doctor whispered. My God, Miguel, she was alive when they put her here. I know, he replied grimly, continuing to carefully expose the grave. Look at her clothes, these aren't from 4 months ago. The decomposition isn't advanced enough either. I think they kept her somewhere, maybe until the construction reached this point. Isabella took systematic photographs, documenting every detail of the grave and Elena's condition. Miguel gently examined the area around the body, finding something he'd missed in his panic the night before. A small notebook, partially decomposed, but with some pages still legible, clutched in Elena's hand. As Isabella continued her documentation, Miguel carefully extracted the notebook, placing it in a plastic bag she had brought. Then, with infinite gentleness, they wrapped Elena's body in the tarp they had brought, securing it with rope. We can't take her with us tonight, Isabella said, voicing the practical concern neither wanted to address. We need to hide her somewhere safe until we can arrange a proper burial. Miguel nodded, his face grim. I know a place. An abandoned storage cellar behind the old lighthouse. It's cool there, and no one goes anymore since the new lighthouse was built. With great care, they lifted Elena's remains and made their slow, careful way out of the construction site. The journey to the abandoned lighthouse took nearly an hour, hampered by the need for secrecy and the weight of their burden. By the time they placed Elena's body in the old stone cellar, securing the heavy wooden door with a rusted but functional padlock, both were physically and emotionally exhausted. We should get back to Esperanza, Isabella said, checking her watch. We've been gone nearly 3 hours. As they made their way back through the sleeping town, Miguel suddenly pulled Isabella into a shadowed doorway. A police cruiser rolled slowly past, its spotlight sweeping the street. Only when it had turned the corner did he release his protective grip on the doctor's arm. That's unusual, Isabella whispered. Night patrols don't normally cover this area. They're looking for something, Miguel replied. Or someone. We need to hurry. When they reached Isabella's house, the woman caring for Esperanza met them with wide, frightened eyes. Police came by, she whispered, asking if I'd seen Dr. Reyes. Said there was a medical emergency at the mayor's house, but they looked wrong somehow. I told them you were sleeping after a long day, and couldn't be disturbed. Isabella thanked her, waiting until she had left before turning to Miguel. They know something's happened. The night watchman must have discovered the excavation. We need to leave now, Miguel said, already gathering the makeshift incubator and supplies. Before they connect the dots and come back. Working quickly, they packed Isabella's old car with essential medical equipment for Esperanza, their documentation, and a few personal belongings. The baby, miraculously, remained stable throughout the hurried preparations, her tiny face peaceful despite the chaos surrounding her. As they prepared to depart, Miguel paused at the door, looking back at the small house that had become their sanctuary. There's one more thing I need to do, he said. A message needs to be delivered. Miguel, we don't have time, Isabella began, but stopped when she saw his expression. 5 minutes, he promised. Take Esperanza to the car. I'll meet you at the old fishing dock, not the main road. If I'm not there in 20 minutes, leave without me. Before Isabella could protest further, Miguel slipped out into the night. His destination was clear, the imposing house on the hill where Elena's family now lived, their silence purchased with blood money. The Navarros needed to know their daughter's fate and their grandchild's survival. As Miguel approached the house, he noticed something unusual. No lights, no signs of life, despite the late hour. The front door, when he reached it, stood slightly ajar. Alarm bells ringing in his mind, Miguel pushed it open. The interior was in disarray, furniture overturned, possessions scattered. And in the living room, slumped in armchairs facing each other, sat Elena's parents. Their vacant eyes stared at nothing, empty glasses fallen from lifeless fingers. Miguel didn't need to check for pulses to know they were dead. The scene had been arranged to suggest a suicide pact. But the overturned furniture and subtle signs of a struggle told a different story. The Navarros had become liabilities, loose ends to be tied up permanently. Fighting nausea, Miguel quickly searched the house, finding in Mr. Yaxtar's escape Navarro's study a folder of documents, land deeds, transfer agreements, and most importantly, a series of threatening letters from development companies connected to Mayor Vega. He took these, knowing they might provide crucial context to Elena's notebook. As he prepared to leave, Miguel noticed a family photograph on the wall, Elena with her parents, all smiling, taken perhaps a year earlier. On impulse, he removed it from its frame, thinking that someday, Esperanza should know the family she had lost. The sound of approaching vehicles spurred him to action. Miguel slipped out the back door, just as headlights illuminated the front of the house. From the cover of nearby trees, he watched as police cars and an unmarked black SUV pulled up. Mayor Vega himself emerged from the SUV, straightening his tie before entering the house, with a performance of concern that made Miguel's blood boil. There was no time to waste. Miguel made his way down the hill through gardens and back paths, avoiding the main streets now alive with unusual activity for such a late hour. By the time he reached the old fishing dock where Isabella waited, police sirens could be heard in the distance. "The Navarros?" Isabella asked as he slipped into the passenger seat, recognizing the grim set of his jaw. "Dead," Miguel replied flatly. "Made to look like suicide." The mayor was there, overseeing everything. Isabella closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this new horror. "Then there's nothing left for us here," she said, starting the engine. "Only danger." As they drove out of Puerto Esperanza by a seldom-used coastal road, Miguel looked back at the town lights growing smaller in the distance. In the back seat, secured in her makeshift incubator, baby Esperanza slept peacefully, unaware that she was the last surviving member of the Navarro family, and living proof of a conspiracy that had now claimed 3 lives. "What happens now?" Isabella asked, as they reached the main highway, turning north, toward San Cristobal. Miguel looked down at the documents he had gathered. Elena's water-damaged notebook, the family photograph, the threatening letters. Together they told the story of corruption, greed, and murder that reached to the highest levels of Puerto Esperanza's government. "Now," he said with quiet determination, "we keep Esperanza safe, gather more evidence, and find someone powerful enough to bring the mayor down." The journey to San Cristobal stretched through the night, each mile increasing the distance between them and the corruption of Puerto Esperanza, while strengthening Miguel's resolve to uncover the truth. Isabella drove steadily, her experienced hands sure on the wheel despite her 70 years, while Miguel tended to baby Esperanza in the back seat, adjusting the makeshift incubator and monitoring her breathing with the vigilance of a guardian angel. "She's stronger than she looks," Isabella observed, glancing in the rear-view mirror at Miguel's massive form hunched protectively over the tiny infant. "A fighter, like her mother must have been." Miguel nodded, remembering the evidence of Elena's desperate struggle in her grave. "She didn't give up, even at the end." "Neither will we." The sun was breaking over the eastern horizon when they reached the outskirts of San Cristobal, a city 5 times the size of Puerto Esperanza, with tall buildings rising against the backdrop of mountains, and a bustling port that served as a major shipping hub for the region. Here, they might find temporary anonymity among the crowds and, more importantly, medical care for Esperanza. Isabella navigated through early morning traffic, toward a modest neighborhood of closely packed homes with small gardens. She pulled up in front of a blue house with white trim, its windows still dark in the early hour. "My goddaughter Lucia works at San Cristobal General," Isabella explained as they gathered their precious cargo. "She's a pediatric nurse with access to the neonatal unit. If anyone can help us without alerting authorities, it's her." Lucia Rodriguez answered the door in scrubs, clearly preparing to leave for her morning shift. "Bring her inside," Lucia directed, medical training overriding questions about the extraordinary circumstances. I need to assess her condition before we decide next steps. Inside, Lucia quickly created an examination area on her dining table, her movements precise and confident, as she checked Esperanza's vital signs, weight and reflexes. 32 weeks gestation, approximately, she confirmed Isabella's initial assessment. She's severely underweight, but her vital signs are stable, a miracle considering the circumstances of her delivery. Miguel watched anxiously as Lucia continued her examination. Can you help her? Lucia looked up, her dark eyes serious. She needs hospitalization, proper incubation, monitoring, and specialized nutrition. The fact that she survived this long is remarkable, but she remains at high risk for numerous complications. We can't take her to a hospital, Miguel said firmly. Not officially. The people who murdered her mother and grandparents will be looking for her. Lucia glanced at Isabella, who nodded confirmation. He's right, Lucia. This child is evidence of crimes that reach to the highest levels of Puerto Esperanza's government. If they learn, she survived. Understanding dawned on Lucia's face. You need to get her proper medical care, without creating records that could be traced. She considered for a moment, then made a decision. I can help, but it will involve risks to my career, possibly my freedom. We wouldn't ask if there were any other way, Isabella said softly. Lucia gently stroked Esperanza's tiny cheek with one finger. No child deserves to suffer for the sins of those in power. I'll bring equipment from the hospital. Gradually, nothing that will be immediately missed. We can create a neonatal unit here. I have colleagues who will help without asking questions. Why would they risk themselves for strangers? Miguel asked. Because some of us still believe in justice, Lucia replied simply. And because Isabella saved my mother's life, when no one else could. Many Masilos in the medical community here owe her similar debts. Over the next 3 days, Lucia's modest home transformed into a secret neonatal care unit. Medical equipment appeared piece by piece, an official incubator, monitoring devices, specialized formula, and medications. Trusted colleagues visited under the guise of social calls, each bringing crucial supplies or offering their expertise. Esperanza thrived under this concentrated care, gaining weight and strength with each passing day. Miguel rarely left her side, his massive frame, a constant protective presence, beside the incubator. When he did sleep, it was in a chair positioned between the baby and the door, ready to defend her at a moment's notice. You've become quite attached, Isabella observed on the 4th evening, finding Miguel reading softly to the infant from a children's book Lucia had provided. She has no one else, Miguel replied simply. And when this is over, when justice is served and Esperanza is safe, what then? Isabella asked gently. Miguel had no answer. He had never imagined himself as a father, had accepted his solitary existence as penance for failing to save his own parents. Yet in the space of less than a week, this tiny being had become the center of his world, her survival his purpose. While Esperanza grew stronger, they focused on building their case against Mayor Vega and his accomplices. Elena's water-damaged notebook proved to be a crucial piece of evidence. Though many pages were illegible, enough remained to piece together a disturbing narrative. Elena had discovered that the land her family had protected for generations contained something valuable. Not precious metals or oil as one might expect, but water. A vast underground aquifer lay beneath their property, potentially worth millions in a region increasingly affected by drought. Mayor Vega's development plans weren't just about a municipal building, they were about controlling the water rights for the entire area. Elena's final entry, dated just 1 day before Miguel estimated she had been buried, was chilling in its prescience. They've offered to buy us out again, higher price this time. When I refused, V said I should reconsider for the baby's sake, not a suggestion, a threat, something in his eyes, I'm afraid. If anything happens to me, the evidence is in the hollow cypress at the north corner of our land. The north corner, Miguel repeated, looking up from the notebook. Exactly where I found her. She must have hidden something there before they took her, Isabella reasoned. Something they never found. Comillas, something now buried under tons of concrete. Miguel added grimly. The foundation pour was scheduled for the day after we left. Despite this setback, they continued assembling their case. The threatening letters Miguel had retrieved from the Navarro home provided context for Elena's notes. The family photograph gave Esperanza's existence personal weight, proof that she belonged to a family now systematically eliminated. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. On the 6th day of their self-imposed exile, Lucia returned from her hospital shift with news. "There's a man asking questions at the hospital," she reported, her expression troubled. Showing a photograph of Isabella, asking if anyone has seen her with a baby. He claims to be from the Puerto Esperanza Department of Child Welfare, but his identification looked wrong somehow. Miguel tensed immediately. "They've traced us to San Cristobal." "Not necessarily," Lucia countered. "He's only asking about Isabella so far, not you. And he doesn't seem to know exactly what he's looking for. A newborn, an older baby, a child. It's like he's fishing for information." Still, it's too dangerous to stay, Miguel decided. "They're getting closer." "Where will you go?" Lucia asked. Miguel had been considering this question for days. "The capital," he finally said. "It's large enough to disappear in, and it has what we need most. Access to federal authorities beyond Mayor Vega's influence." "Esperanza isn't strong enough for another journey," Isabella objected. "She's stable but still vulnerable." "I know a doctor in the capital," Lucia offered. "He runs a private clinic for wealthy families, very discreet, very exclusive. If I explain the situation, he might help." "We can't risk exposing more people," Miguel argued. "Dr. Vargas isn't just any doctor," Lucia explained. "Before opening his private practice, he was the federal prosecutor's chief medical examiner. He still has connections in the Justice Department." This changed the calculation entirely. A direct line to federal authorities could bypass local corruption and ensure their evidence received proper attention. "How soon can you contact him?" Miguel asked. "Tonight," Lucia promised. "If he agrees, you could leave tomorrow night. I'll arrange transportation that won't be traced back to any of us." That evening, as Lucia made her call from a public phone away from her house, Miguel sat beside Esperanza's incubator, watching her sleep peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding her or the difficult journey ahead. "I will keep you safe," he whispered, his large finger gently clasped in her tiny hand. "Whatever it takes." Isabella entered quietly, carrying a cup of tea. "You should rest while you can," she advised, setting the cup beside him. "Tomorrow will be challenging." Miguel nodded but didn't move from his position. After a moment of silence, he asked the question that had been troubling him. "Why didn't Elena come to you when she realized she was in danger? You might have helped her escape before." "Before they buried her alive," Isabella finished when he couldn't. "I ask myself the same question every day." She sighed heavily. "Elena did reach out. Left a message at my clinic the day before she disappeared. I was at a medical conference in the capital. By the time I returned 3 days later, she was already gone, and the official story was that she had left the town voluntarily." "You couldn't have known," Miguel said gently. "Perhaps not, but I should have questioned the story more persistently. Everyone in Puerto Esperanza has become too accustomed to looking the other way." Her gaze fell on Esperanza. "But this child gives us a chance to break that pattern. Through her, we might finally bring truth to light." Lucia returned an hour later, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Dr. Vargas will help," she confirmed. "He was bar costelli imprec teleclocon, nersul intrigued by the situation. Said it aligns with rumors he's heard about corruption in coastal development projects. He's arranging for a trusted driver to bring you to the capital tomorrow night." "And the man asking questions at the hospital?" Miguel pressed. "Still there, but now he's showing your photograph too," Lucia admitted. "Someone must have connected you to Isabella. The hospital security office has been alerted that he may not be a legitimate official." The news confirmed Miguel's worst fears. Their pursuers were getting closer, narrowing the search. They needed to move quickly, but Esperanza's safety remained the priority. Throughout the next day, they prepared for departure with meticulous care. Lucía acquired a portable incubator designed for medical transport, ensuring Esperanza could travel safely. Isabella organized their evidence and prepared detailed medical notes on the baby's condition. Miguel focused on security, creating contingency plans for every scenario he could imagine. At 8:30, as they made final preparations, a sharp knock at the door froze everyone in place. Miguel immediately moved to Esperanza, positioning himself between the incubator and the potential threat. Isabella and Lucía exchanged alarmed glances. "Are you expecting anyone?" Miguel whispered. Lucía shook her head, moving cautiously toward the window. Peering through a narrow gap in the curtains, she exhaled in relief. "It's Carlos Kulik siatia lit controias de cholas en setia carsi caliste cartelt, movin alo yeste carsicada." She opened the door to admit a young Dr. Miguel vaguely recognized from previous visits. The man's expression was grave as he addressed Lucía. "You need to leave immediately," he said without preamble. "The man asking questions at the hospital confronted me today, showed me your photograph, claimed you were harboring a kidnapped infant." Carlos ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "I denied knowing anything, but I don't think he believed me. I saw him following me when I left my shift." "Did you lead him here?" Miguel demanded, already mentally calculating escape routes. "No," Carlos assured him. "I took precautions, doubled back, made sure I wasn't followed before coming here. But it's only a matter of time before they connect the dots. Lucía's been missing shifts, borrowing equipment, people talk. Our transport isn't scheduled until 9, Isabella said. Where can we go for the next hour?" Carlos hesitated, then offered. "My brother has a repair shop 3 blocks from here. The garage area isn't visible from the street. You could wait there until your driver arrives." It wasn't ideal, but remaining in Lucía's house had become too dangerous. Within minutes, they had loaded the portable incubator, medical supplies, and their precious evidence into Carlos's car. Miguel cradled Esperanza during the transfer, his body tense with protective vigilance. The repair shop was closed for the evening, its large garage door secured but accessible through a side entrance using Carlos's key. Inside, vehicles in various states of repair created a maze of potential hiding places. Carlos led them to a small office at the back, offering more privacy and comfort while they waited. "I'll return to my apartment as usual," he explained. "Maintain normal patterns, in case I'm being watched. Your driver can pick you up at the service entrance in the alley. Lucía has the address to provide to him." After Carlos left, the minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Miguel paced the small office, checking and rechecking Esperanza's condition. Isabella sorted through their documentation once more, ensuring nothing was missing. Lucía kept watch at the small window overlooking the alley, alert for any unusual activity. At 8:55, headlights appeared at the far end of the alley. A white van with medical transport markings approached slowly, coming to a stop precisely at the service entrance. The driver, a middle-aged man with a military bearing, exited and knocked on the door in a distinctive pattern, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones, the signal Lucía had arranged with Dr. Vargas. Miguel positioned himself protectively, as Lucía opened the door, ready to defend Esperanza if necessary. But the driver's credentials checked out, including a personal note from Dr. Vargas that contained information only he would know. "We need to move quickly," the driver advised after introductions. "The roads out of the city are being watched. We'll take an alternate route, but it will add time to the journey." As they loaded their precious cargo into the van, Miguel noticed Lucía hanging back. "You're not coming with us?" he asked, surprised. She shook her head. "I can do more good here, monitoring their search, providing misinformation if possible. Besides, someone needs to cover our tracks." Isabella embraced her goddaughter tightly. "You've risked everything for us, for Esperanza. How can we ever repay you?" "Bring down the people who did this," Lucía replied simply. "Make sure Elena's death wasn't in vain. That's payment enough." With final goodbyes exchanged, Miguel settled in the back of the van beside Esperanza's transport incubator, while Isabella took the passenger seat beside their driver, who introduced himself only as Martín. As they pulled away from the repair shop, following a circuitous route through industrial areas to avoid main roads, Miguel glanced back at the diminishing lights of San Cristobal. For the second time in less than 2 weeks, he was fleeing in the night, protecting an innocent life, while carrying evidence of unimaginable corruption. The journey to the capital would take approximately 6 hours under normal circumstances, but Martin's alternate route involved rural back roads that added considerable time. Esperanza remained stable throughout the night, her tiny body secure in the transport incubator that maintained perfect temperature and humidity levels. As they traveled, Martin proved to be more than just a driver. Dr. Vargas briefed me on the situation, he explained, during a brief stop to check on Esperanza and refuel the van. I was a federal police investigator before retiring. The doctor thought my experience might be useful. You believe our story? Miguel asked directly. Martin's weathered face remained impassive. I've spent 30 years investigating corruption cases. What you describe? Powerful interests eliminating obstacles, political figures abusing authority. This is unfortunately familiar territory. He checked the van's mirrors, a habitual security measure. The evidence will speak for itself. My job is simply to get you safely to people who can act on it. Around 3 in the morning, as they navigated a particularly remote stretch of road, Martin suddenly slowed the van. We have company, he said calmly, nodding toward the rear-view mirror. Vehicle following us for the last 20 minutes. No headlights. Miguel's heart rate accelerated as he peered through the rear windows. In the moonlight, he could just make out the silhouette of a large SUV, maintaining a consistent distance behind them. Could be coincidence, Isabella suggested without much conviction. Perhaps, Martin replied, but I prefer caution to coincidence. He increased their speed slightly, taking a sudden turn onto an even smaller road. The SUV followed. Not coincidence, he confirmed grimly. How did they find us? Miguel demanded, positioning himself protectively over Esperanza's incubator. Questions for later, Martin replied, his focus entirely on the road ahead. For now, we need to lose them, or reach a populated area. He accelerated further, the van bouncing over the uneven rural road. The SUV kept pace, gradually closing the distance between them. In the darkness, Miguel could now make out 3 distinct figures in the pursuing vehicle. There's a village about 15 kilometers ahead, Martin informed them, his voice remaining remarkably steady. If we can reach it, we might find help, or at least witnesses, which could deter them. But before they could implement this plan, the sound of an engine roaring behind them announced the SUV's final approach. It pulled alongside the van, swerving toward them in an attempt to force them off the road. Martin's training showed in his response. He neither panicked nor overcorrected, maintaining control of the van while gradually reducing speed to make a forced stop safer for the incubator and its precious occupant. As both vehicles slowed, Miguel made a split-second decision. Keep driving, he instructed Martin. Get Isabella and Esperanza to the capital. I'll delay them. Miguel, no. Isabella protested, but he had already moved to the van's side door. The evidence means nothing if Esperanza doesn't survive, he said firmly. I can handle myself. Get her to safety, that's all that matters now. Before further objections could be raised, Miguel slid the door open and launched his massive frame toward the SUV, just as both vehicles came to a stop on the deserted road. His sudden aggressive action took the pursuers by surprise, creating the distraction he'd intended. Go, he shouted to Martin, who understood immediately and accelerated away, carrying Isabella and Esperanza toward safety while Miguel confronted their hunters. 3 men emerged from the SUV. The apparent leader in an expensive suit despite the hour, flanked by 2 obvious enforcers whose stances suggested military or police training. Miguel recognized the leader immediately as Javier Domingo, Mayor Vega's chief of security and rumored enforcer. Fuentes, Domingo acknowledged with a cold smile. You've led us on quite a chase. It ends here, Miguel replied, spreading his arms to make himself appear even larger, blocking the road in the direction the van had disappeared. Indeed it does, Domingo agreed. Where is the child? Miguel's expression revealed nothing. What child? Domingo's smile vanished. Don't play games. We know, the Navarro woman was pregnant. We know, you found her before the concrete pour. We know, you took something from that grave. His hand moved to his jacket, where the outline of a holstered weapon was visible. "The mayor wants what his cap is." "His cap is?" Miguel repeated, genuine disgust breaking through his careful facade. "You buried a woman alive, murdered her parents, and now claim her child belongs to Vega?" A flicker of surprise crossed Domingo's face before he controlled it. "So the baby survived. Interesting. That makes our task both simpler and more complicated." He gestured to his companions. "Search him. He must have documentation, evidence." As the men approached, Miguel made his final calculations. He was outnumbered, and they were armed, but he had advantages: his size, the darkness, and most importantly, righteous fury. The gentle giant of Puerto Esperanza had spent his life restraining his physical power, careful never to harm others, with his enormous strength. But now, with an innocent child's life at stake, he unleashed it fully. The first enforcer reached for him, and found himself airborne, thrown bodily into the second man with bone-crushing force. As both struggled to regain their footing, Miguel charged Domingo directly, moving with surprising speed for his size. Domingo managed to draw his weapon, but Miguel's momentum carried them both to the ground before he could aim properly. The gun discharged harmlessly into the night sky, as Miguel's massive fist connected with Domingo's jaw. The battle was brief but brutal. Though trained and armed, the three men had not expected such ferocity from the usually gentle construction worker. By the time it ended, all three lay unconscious on the deserted road, securely bound with their own belts and neckties. Their vehicle keys and weapons had been thrown far into the surrounding fields, and Miguel had appropriated their phones and identification. Bloodied but unbowed, Miguel began the long walk toward the village Martín had mentioned. Each step carried him further from his past life, and closer to a new purpose, not just bringing justice for Elena Navarro, but ensuring her daughter would grow up in a world where the powerful couldn't simply bury their crimes beneath progress and prosperity. As dawn broke over the countryside, illuminating his solitary figure on the empty road, Miguel thought of tiny Esperanza, fighting for life in her incubator, unaware of the sacrifices being made on her behalf, or the corruption her very existence exposed. In saving her, he had found something he'd lost years ago when burying his parents: hope for the future and faith that one person's actions could matter. The gentle giant walked steadily onward, each step a promise to the child, who had unexpectedly captured his heart. The powerful would be held accountable, justice would prevail, and she would grow up knowing the truth about her mother's courage and the lengths strangers had gone to ensure her survival. Creating and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means the world to us. Now, let's continue following Miguel's dangerous journey toward justice. Miguel reached the small village of Santa Rosa, just as the morning's first light painted the mountains in golden hues. His imposing figure, clothes torn and bloodied from the confrontation, drew immediate attention from early rising farmers heading to their fields. Their initial wariness transformed to concern when he explained he needed urgent help: a vehicle, a phone, anything to reach the capital city as quickly as possible. "A child's life depends on it," he told them, his sincerity evident in every word. In communities like Santa Rosa, far from urban centers and largely forgotten by government officials, people still recognized truth when they heard it. An elderly man named Héctor offered his truck and his grandson Pablo as driver. No payment was requested, just a promise. When you achieve what you're fighting for, remember there are many Elenas in places like ours, people whose voices are silenced by the powerful. Miguel nodded solemnly. "I won't forget." The journey to the capital took another 3 hours, Pablo navigating mountain roads with the confidence of someone born to them. Miguel used this time to examine the phones and identification he'd taken from Domingo and his men. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions: messages detailing the search for the Navarro situation, coordinates of Lucia's neighborhood in San Cristobal, and most damning of all, direct communications with Mayor Vega authorizing whatever means necessary to resolve the matter permanently. Upon reaching the outskirts of the capital city, Miguel directed Pablo to Dr. Vargas's private clinic, an elegant building in the affluent Eastern District, its understated exterior belying the state-of-the-art facilities within. Pablo refused Miguel's offer of gas money for the return journey, saying only, "My grandfather would be disappointed in me if I took payment for doing what's right." As the truck departed, Miguel stood before the clinic entrance, gathering his courage. In his previous life as a construction worker, he had never entered such an establishment, had never imagined himself worthy of crossing such thresholds. But Esperanza had changed everything, giving him purpose that transcended his own limitations. At the reception desk, Miguel's appearance caused immediate concern, until he mentioned Dr. Vargas and Martin. He was quickly ushered into a private elevator and taken to the clinic's top floor, where security was noticeably enhanced. The elevator doors opened to reveal Isabella waiting anxiously in a sleek corridor. Her face flooded with relief at the sight of him. "Miguel. Thank God. We feared the worst when you didn't arrive with us." "Domingo and his men won't be troubling anyone for a while," Miguel replied simply. "How is Esperanza?" Isabella's expression softened. "See for yourself." She led him to a state-of-the-art neonatal room, where Esperanza lay in a modern incubator, monitored by equipment more sophisticated than anything they'd managed in Lucia's house. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s stood reviewing her charts. "Dr. Vargas," Miguel presumed. "Our hero arrives," the doctor observed, extending his hand. "Your daughter is remarkably resilient, Mr. Fuentes. Her vital signs have stabilized significantly in just a few hours since her arrival." Miguel didn't correct the misunderstanding about his relationship to Esperanza. Instead, he moved to the incubator, placing one massive hand gently against the clear plastic, as though attempting to protect her even through this barrier. "She's truly out of danger?" he asked softly. "Not entirely," Dr. Vargas replied with professional candor. "Premature infants face numerous challenges. But she's responding well to treatment, and I've seen far more precarious cases develop into perfectly healthy children." He studied Miguel thoughtfully. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths for this child." "She deserves nothing less," Miguel said simply. Dr. Vargas nodded as though Miguel had passed some unspoken test. "Isabella has briefed me on the situation. The evidence you've gathered is compelling, but to proceed against someone of Mayor Vega's standing, we need irrefutable proof of his direct involvement." Miguel produced the phones he'd taken from Domingo. "Will this help?" Dr. Vargas examined the devices with growing interest. "Potentially decisive, yes. But they must be processed properly to be admissible in court." He made a decision. "It's time to bring in Judge Catalina Rosario. If anyone can navigate these waters safely, it's her." Within an hour, Judge Rosario arrived, a formidable woman in her 50s, whose reputation for incorruptibility had made her both respected and feared in the capital's legal circles. She listened without interruption, as Miguel and Isabella recounted their harrowing journey, examining each piece of evidence with methodical precision. When they finished, she remained silent for several moments, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "What you've presented constitutes grounds for a federal investigation into Mayor Vega and his associates. The phones alone contain sufficient evidence to justify warrants." She fixed Miguel with a penetrating gaze. "But pursuing this case means placing yourselves in grave danger. Vega has powerful allies beyond Puerto Esperanza. Are you prepared for what may come?" "With respect, Your Honor," Miguel replied, "we're already in grave danger. The difference now is whether we face it alone, or with the protection of the law." Judge Rosario's stern expression softened slightly. "Well said, Mr. Fuentes." She turned to Dr. Vargas. "The child must remain here under your care, protected at all costs. She is not only an innocent deserving our protection but living evidence of these crimes." To Miguel and Isabella she added, "You'll both be placed under federal protection immediately. I'll convene a special grand jury within 48 hours. Until then, you don't leave this facility for any reason." As Judge Rosario departed to set the legal machinery in motion, Dr. Vargas showed Miguel and Isabella to private rooms adjacent to Esperanza's. Rest, he advised. You've done all you can for now. The next steps require patience. But rest proved elusive for Miguel. After showering and changing into clean clothes provided by the clinic staff, he returned to Esperanza's room, settling into the chair beside her incubator. Here, in the soft glow of monitoring equipment, he finally allowed himself to process all that had occurred since that fateful night at the construction site. Your mother would be proud, he whispered to the sleeping infant. She fought to protect you until her last breath. Now it's my turn to continue that fight. Isabella found him there hours later, still maintaining his vigil. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You need to sleep, Miguel. I will, he promised, without moving. Soon, the next morning, brought new developments. Judge Rosario returned with federal prosecutor Rafael Montero, a serious young man whose reputation for tackling corruption had made him both celebrated and targeted. Accompanying them was Commander Elena Diaz of the Federal Police, a coincidence of first names that Miguel couldn't help but see as symbolic. We've obtained warrants for Mayor Vega and 15 other individuals, including Javier Domingo, Prosecutor Montero informed them. Teams are being dispatched to Puerto Esperanza as we speak. The phones you obtained have proven invaluable. They contained not only communications about Elena Navarro's murder but evidence of a broader conspiracy involving water rights throughout the coastal region. Water rights? Isabella asked. Commander Diaz nodded. We've suspected for some time that certain development projects along the coast were fronts for a more sinister purpose, controlling access to the region's increasingly scarce water resources. The Navarro property sits atop one of the largest undeveloped aquifers in the province. Elena discovered this, Miguel realized, remembering her notebook entries. That's why she became a target. Precisely, Prosecutor Montero confirmed. And why they couldn't simply kill her outright. They needed her family to transfer the land legally, which required her signature as co-owner. Based on the evidence we've gathered, they kept her captive, pressuring her to sign the transfer documents. When she refused despite their threats, they decided to eliminate her in a way that would be covered up permanently, buried beneath the municipal building's foundation. Commander Diaz continued. They didn't realize she was still alive when they buried her, or that her child might survive. The clinical detachment with which they discussed Elena's fate made Miguel's stomach turn, but he recognized the necessity of their professional approach. Justice required evidence and legal procedure, not just righteous anger. What happens now? He asked. We move carefully but decisively, Judge Rosario replied. Mayor Vega and his associates will be arrested simultaneously to prevent evidence tampering or escape. The construction site will be secured as a crime scene, and Elena's body will be properly exhumed for forensic examination. And Esperanza? Miguel couldn't keep the anxiety from his voice. Officially, she doesn't exist yet, Prosecutor Montero explained gently. No birth certificate. No legal identity. This actually works in our favor for now. It makes her harder to trace. Once we've secured the primary suspects, we'll establish her legal status as Elena Navarro's daughter. What about her father? Isabella asked the question Miguel had avoided. A significant glance passed between the officials. Based on DNA samples taken from Esperanza, Commander Diaz said carefully, and compared against records in our database, we have reason to believe Mayor Vega himself is the biological father. The revelation struck Miguel like a physical blow. Vega? But that would mean, protacarar l'oculto recto. That Elena's pregnancy resulted from assault, not a relationship, Judge Rosario finished grimly. It added this another dimension to the case, and potentially explains Vega's particular determination to find the child, not from any paternal instinct, but to eliminate the living evidence of his crimes. Miguel's hands clenched involuntarily, his massive frame trembling with barely controlled rage. The thought of Elena violated by the same man who later ordered her buried alive was almost too much to bear. Miguel, Isabella said softly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Remember why we're here. Justice for Elena means following the law, not seeking vengeance. With visible effort, he mastered his emotions. You're right. Esperanza deserves better than a guardian consumed by hatred. He turned to the officials. What can we do to help? The next 48 hours passed in a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and tense waiting. Miguel divided his time between providing testimony and sitting with Esperanza, whose condition continued to improve under Dr. Vargas's care. She was growing stronger daily, her tiny hands now gripping his finger with surprising strength whenever he reached into the incubator to touch her. On the morning of the third day, Commander Diaz arrived with news. Mayor Vega has been arrested, along with most of his associates, she reported. Domingo and his men were found where you left them. They've also been taken into custody. The municipal building site has been secured, and forensic teams are exhuming Elena's remains as we speak. Relief washed over Miguel, though he knew this was just the beginning of a long legal process. Has Vega confessed? No, but his facade is cracking, Commander Diaz replied. When confronted with the evidence from the phones and Elena's notebook, he attempted to shift blame to his subordinates. Classic behavior for a cornered narcissist. Later that day, Dr. Vargas brought further encouraging news about Esperanza. She is reaching milestones we wouldn't expect for several more weeks, he reported, genuine admiration in his voice. Her lungs are developing rapidly, and she's taking feedings well. If she continues at this pace, she could be breathing without assistance within days. She's a fighter, Miguel said proudly, as though speaking of his own child. Like her guardian, Isabella observed with a knowing smile. That evening, as sunset painted the capital city in hues of orange and gold, Judge Rosario visited one final time, before returning to her chambers, to continue processing the rapidly expanding case. There's something you should know, she told Miguel, as they stood watching Esperanza sleep peacefully in her incubator. In situations like this, when a child has no living relatives, the state typically assumes custody pending adoption proceedings. Miguel's heart constricted painfully at the thought of Esperanza being placed in state care, perhaps eventually with strangers who knew nothing of her mother's courage or the circumstances of her miraculous birth. Judge Rosario studied his reaction carefully, before continuing. However, given the exceptional circumstances and your demonstrated commitment to this child's welfare, I've spoken with family court officials about an alternative arrangement. If you're willing, you could apply for temporary guardianship while the case proceeds, potentially leading to permanent adoption. The possibility had hovered at the edges of Miguel's consciousness, since the moment he'd held Esperanza in his massive hands. But he hadn't dared articulate it even to himself. Me? But I'm just a construction worker. I have no home now, no resources. You have everything that truly matters for raising a child, Judge Rosario interrupted firmly. Courage, integrity, and boundless capacity for love. The rest are details that can be addressed. She deserves better than I can provide, Miguel protested weakly, though his heart was already rejecting the notion of being separated from Esperanza. Better than someone who risked his life, repeated Ly to save hers, who sat by her side day and night ensuring her safety, who faced down armed men to protect her. Judge Rosario shook her head. I've been a judge for 23 years, Mr. Fuentes. I've seen thousands of parents in my courtroom. Many had wealth, education, and social standing, yet lacked the fundamental qualities you've demonstrated since pulling this child from her mother's grave. Isabella, who had been listening silently, added her perspective. Miguel, I've watched you with Esperanza. The bond between you is already formed. She responds to your voice, comes at your touch. Some connections transcend biology, or conventional circumstances. Looking down at his massive calloused hands, hands that had spent decades building structures for others, Miguel tried to imagine them performing the delicate tasks of parenthood, changing tiny diapers, preparing bottles, soothing nightmares. The enormity of the responsibility terrified him, yet the alternative, walking away from Esperanza, once justice was served, seemed inconceivable. What if I fail her? He whispered, voicing his deepest fear. All parents fear failure, Judge Rosario replied gently. The difference is that some, like you, will move heaven and earth to prevent it. As if sensing she was the subject of this pivotal conversation, Esperanza chose that moment to wake, her tiny eyes blinking up at the faces gathered around her incubator. When her gaze found Miguel, her expression seemed to soften, her small body turning instinctively toward his familiar presence. In that moment, Watching this miraculous child who had survived against impossible odds, Miguel made his decision. Whatever challenges lay ahead, legal battles, financial struggles, the daunting learning curve of sudden parenthood, they paled in comparison to what Esperanza had already overcome. If she could fight so valiantly to live, he could certainly fight just as hard to give her the life she deserved. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Judge Rosario nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "I'll expedite the paperwork myself. Given the exceptional circumstances, I anticipate minimal bureaucratic obstacles." As the judge departed, Isabella squeezed Miguel's arm supportively. "You've just taken on the greatest construction project of your life," she observed with gentle humor. "Building a future for Esperanza." The metaphor resonated with Miguel. "Every structure needs a solid foundation," he replied, gazing down at the infant who had unwittingly transformed his existence. "Hers will be truth, justice, and love, no matter how long it takes to build." Over the following weeks, as summer heat gave way to autumn breezes, several transformative developments occurred in tandem. Esperanza continued her remarkable progress, graduating from the incubator to a standard bassinet, her weight increasing steadily until Dr. Vargas pronounced her astonishingly healthy considering her traumatic entry into the world. The case against Mayor Vega and his associates expanded dramatically as investigators uncovered evidence of corruption extending far beyond Elena's murder. The water rights conspiracy proved to be just one facet of a complex network of illegal activities involving land appropriation, environmental violations, and systematic intimidation of anyone who stood in the way of their schemes. Elena Navarro received the dignified burial she deserved, her remains laid to rest in the capital's central cemetery rather than returned to Puerto Esperanza, which still grappled with the shocking revelations about its leadership. Miguel attended the small ceremony with Esperanza, now strong enough for brief outings when carefully monitored. Though the infant would have no conscious memory of this moment, he felt it essential that she be present to honor the mother whose final act of protection had given her a chance at life. As for Miguel himself, he underwent a transformation perhaps more profound than any other aspect of this extraordinary journey. With Judge Rosario's intervention, his temporary guardianship of Esperanza was approved with remarkable speed. Dr. Vargas offered him employment as a security specialist at the clinics, providing both income and a safe environment where Esperanza could continue receiving specialized care while Miguel learned the fundamentals of parenthood. Isabella Reyes, whose medical expertise and moral courage had been instrumental in Esperanza's survival, accepted a position as consulting physician at the same clinic, ensuring continuity of care for her tiny patient while also serving as a surrogate grandmother figure in the unconventional family unit they were forming. 1 month after their dramatic arrival in the capital, Miguel stood on the balcony of the modest apartment he now rented near the clinic, cradling Esperanza against his chest as the setting sun painted the city skyline in breathtaking colors. At 3 months old, 2 months adjusted for her prematurity, she had already developed distinct preferences and expressions, a determined furrow of her brow when concentrating that reminded him powerfully of Elena, and a resilience that seemed to be entirely her own. "Your mother loved sunsets," he told her softly, continuing the practice of sharing memories and stories, even though she was far too young to understand. She wrote about them in her notebook, how they reminded her that even the darkest days eventually end in beauty. Esperanza gazed up at him with solemn dark eyes that seemed impossibly wise for one so young. Though he knew it was likely just a reflexive response, Miguel couldn't help feeling she understood on some fundamental level that transcended language or cognitive development. A knock at the door announced Isabella's arrival for her evening visit, a ritual that had become an anchoring point in their new routine. She entered carrying groceries and a small package wrapped in colorful paper. "A gift for our little miracle," she explained, setting down her bags to unwrap it herself. Inside was a beautiful silver frame containing the photograph Miguel had rescued from the Navarro home, Elena with her parents, their smiles preserved in time. "For when she's old enough to understand," Isabella said. "So she knows where she came from." Miguel placed the frame on a shelf where it would be visible from Esperanza's crib. "Thank you. This means more than I can express." As they prepared a simple dinner together, Isabella updated him on the latest developments in the case. "Prosecutor Montero called this afternoon. Vega's former assistant has agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Her testimony apparently confirms everything: the pregnancy resulting from assault, Elena's captivity, the direct order to bury her at the construction site. Comillas. Will it be enough? Miguel asked, the question that had haunted him since they'd first brought their evidence to the authorities. Montero believes so. Combined with the physical evidence, and the financial records they've uncovered, he's confident of securing convictions for all the primary players. She hesitated before adding, he also mentioned that several other cases have emerged. Other families pressured off their land, other voices silenced. Elena wasn't the first victim, just the one whose story finally came to light. Miguel absorbed this sobering information while gently shifting Esperanza to his shoulder, patting her back with a practiced touch that still sometimes amazed him, how quickly his massive hands had adapted to these delicate tasks. Then her legacy extends beyond Esperanza, he observed. Her resistance, her refusal to surrender what was rightfully hers. It's bringing justice for others too. Exactly, Isabella agreed. One person's courage, even when it seems futile, can ignite change beyond anything they might have imagined. Later that evening, after Isabella had departed, and Esperanza had been settled in her crib, Miguel sat at his small desk, reviewing the guardianship documents that represented the first step toward formal adoption. The legal language was daunting, but he worked through it methodically, determined to understand every aspect of the commitment he was making. A separate folder contained information about educational funds being established for Esperanza from assets seized in the corruption investigation, ensuring that financial limitations would never restrict her opportunities. Another document outlined the psychological support services available to help Miguel guide her through the eventual understanding of her origins. The path ahead remained challenging. The trials were still months away, requiring Miguel's testimony, and potentially exposing him to public scrutiny, or even retribution from Vega's remaining allies. Parenthood itself presented daily challenges that sometimes left him feeling woefully inadequate, despite Isabella's reassurances that his instincts were sound. Yet as he checked on Esperanza one final time before seeking his own rest, Miguel felt a profound peace that transcended these concerns. Watching her small chest rise and fall, in the gentle rhythm of secure sleep, he marveled at how completely this tiny being had transformed his existence. The solitary construction worker who had once believed his life would amount to nothing more than physical labor performed for others, had discovered an entirely different kind of building, constructing a life of purpose, justice, and love. "Sleep well, little one," he whispered, his massive hand engulfing hers where it lay outside her blanket. "Tomorrow is another day in our story. And I promise you it's going to be a story worth telling." Creating and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means the world to us. Now, let's see how Miguel and Esperanza's extraordinary journey continues. The federal courthouse stood like a limestone sentinel in the heart of the capital, its classical columns and broad steps projecting an aura of permanence and authority that had witnessed decades of the nation's legal history. On this crisp autumn morning, 6 months after Miguel had first unearthed Elena Navarro from her shallow grave, he climbed those steps with Esperanza secured against his chest in a carrier, a tiny witness to the culmination of the journey her miraculous survival had set in motion. The trial of Mayor Alejandro Vega and his associates had dominated national headlines for weeks, exposing corruption that extended far beyond Puerto Esperanza to implicate officials in multiple coastal municipalities. What had begun as the investigation of a single murder had unraveled an elaborate conspiracy involving land appropriation, environmental crimes, and the systematic silencing of opposition through intimidation and, ultimately, violence. Today marked Miguel's final court appearance, his testimony complete, his role in bringing these crimes to light acknowledged by prosecutors and judge alike. Now he attended, only to witness justice being served, to fulfill his promise to Elena, that her killers would face accountability for their actions. Isabella waited for them inside, her silver hair elegantly styled for the occasions, her expression a mixture of anticipation and solemn recognition of the moment's significance. "They're ready for the verdict," she informed him quietly. Judge Morales seems determined to conclude before noon. In the 6 months since their arrival in the capital, Isabella had become family to Miguel and Esperanza, a grandmother figure, whose medical expertise was matched only by her wisdom and compassion. Together they entered the courtroom, finding seats in the section reserved for witnesses and victims' representatives. At 8 months old, 7 months adjusted for prematurity, Esperanza was remarkably alert and engaged with her surroundings, her dark eyes, so like her mother's, taking in the imposing space with apparent fascination. She belongs here, Isabella observed softly, witnessing this moment. Without her, none of this would have happened. Miguel nodded, adjusting the small sunflower pin to Esperanza's dress, a tribute to Elena, who had mentioned in her notebook that sunflowers were symbols of justice because they always turned to face the light. She'll understand someday, I'll make sure of it. The courtroom filled quickly with journalists, legal observers, and citizens drawn by the case's significance. Miguel noticed several familiar faces: Dr. Vargas seated discreetly near the back, Lucia who had traveled from San Cristobal for this day, and even Pablo and his grandfather Héctor, who had provided that crucial ride when Miguel escaped Domingo's men. A hush fell over the assembly as Mayor Vega and his co-defendants were led in car array, their expensive suits and previously confident demeanors, now diminished by months in detention. Vega's gaze swept the courtroom, briefly connecting with Miguel's before darting to the infant in his arms. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or the nearest approximation of remorse such a man could manage, crossed his face before he turned away. Judge Morales entered, her black robes flowing as she took her position at the bench. After the procedural formalities, she addressed the defendants directly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. The evidence presented in this case has painted a disturbing picture of power abused, lives destroyed, and public trust violated on a scale rarely seen in our courts, she began. What makes these crimes particularly reprehensible is not merely their severity, but the calculated disregard for human dignity they represent. She turned her attention specifically to Vega. Mayor Alejandro Vega, you were elected to protect and serve the citizens of Puerto Esperanza. Instead, you exploited your position to enrich yourself and your associates, treating human lives as obstacles to be removed when they interfered with your ambitions. The judge methodically outlined the charges against each defendant before arriving at the verdict. Unsurprisingly, given the overwhelming evidence, all were found guilty on multiple counts. Vega himself received the harshest sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murder of Elena Navarro, with additional consecutive sentences for his other crimes ensuring he would never again walk free. As the sentences were pronounced, Miguel felt no triumph or vindication, only a quiet relief that justice, however imperfect, had been served. Elena was still gone, her parents still murdered, a community still traumatized by the betrayal of its leaders. No verdict could restore what had been lost. Yet as he gazed down at Esperanza, now sleeping peacefully against his chest, despite the solemn proceedings around her, he recognized that something profound had been achieved. This child would grow up in a world where her mother's killers had been held accountable, where her own existence stood as living testament to the proposition that truth, however deeply buried, could eventually come to light. After the verdicts were delivered and the defendants led away, Prosecutor Montero approached Miguel in the courthouse corridor, extending his hand. I want to personally thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Your courage made this possible. Miguel accepted the handshake, conscious of how far he'd come from the reticent construction worker who had once believed himself powerless against the machinations of the influential. I just did what anyone should have done, but didn't, Montero pointed out. That's the critical difference. When confronted with evidence of wrongdoing, you chose action over indifference. His gaze fell on Esperanza, and in doing so, you saved more than just one life. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, eager for statements from key figures in the case. Miguel had avoided media attention throughout the proceedings, protective of Esperanza's privacy and uncomfortable with being portrayed as a hero. But today, with the case concluded and the truth firmly established in the public record, he felt a responsibility to speak, not for himself, but for Elena and all those who had been silenced. When approached by journalists, he agreed to a brief statement. Cameras flashed as he stood on the courthouse steps, Esperanza now awake and regarding the crowd with curious eyes, Isabella at his side providing silent support. "Justice has been served today," Miguel began, his deep voice carrying without effort, something now buried under tons of concrete. Miguel added grimly. "The foundation pour was scheduled for the day after we left." Despite this setback, they continued assembling their case. The threatening letters Miguel had retrieved from the Navarro home provided context for Elena's notes. The family photograph gave Esperanza's existence personal weight, proof that she belonged to a family now systematically eliminated. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. On the 6th day of their self-imposed exile, Lucia returned from her hospital shift with news. "There's a man asking questions at the hospital," she reported, her expression troubled. Showing a photograph of Isabella, asking if anyone has seen her with a baby. He claims to be from the Puerto Esperanza Department of Child Welfare, but his identification looked wrong somehow. Miguel tensed immediately. "They've traced us to San Cristobal." "Not necessarily," Lucia countered. "He's only asking about Isabella so far, not you. And he doesn't seem to know exactly what he's looking for. A newborn, an older baby, a child. It's like he's fishing for information." "Still, it's too dangerous to stay," Miguel decided. "They're getting closer." "Where will you go?" Lucia asked. Miguel had been considering this question for days. "The capital," he finally said. "It's large enough to disappear in, and it has what we need most. Access to federal authorities beyond Mayor Vega's influence." "Esperanza isn't strong enough for another journey," Isabella objected. "She's stable but still vulnerable." "I know a doctor in the capital," Lucia offered. "He runs a private clinic for wealthy families, very discreet, very exclusive. If I explain the situation, he might help." "We can't risk exposing more people," Miguel argued. "Dr. Vargas isn't just any doctor," Lucia explained. "Before opening his private practice, he was the federal prosecutor's chief medical examiner. He still has connections in the Justice Department." This changed the calculation entirely. A direct line to federal authorities could bypass local corruption and ensure their evidence received proper attention. "How soon can you contact him?" Miguel asked. "Tonight," Lucia promised. "If he agrees, you could leave tomorrow night. I'll arrange transportation that won't be traced back to any of us." That evening, as Lucia made her call from a public phone away from her house, Miguel sat beside Esperanza's incubator, watching her sleep peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding her or the difficult journey ahead. "I will keep you safe," he whispered, his large finger gently clasped in her tiny hand. "Whatever it takes." Isabella entered quietly, carrying a cup of tea. "You should rest while you can," she advised, setting the cup beside him. "Tomorrow will be challenging." Miguel nodded but didn't move from his position. After a moment of silence, he asked the question that had been troubling him. "Why didn't Elena come to you when she realized she was in danger? You might have helped her escape before." "Before they buried her alive," Isabella finished when he couldn't. "I ask myself the same question every day." She sighed heavily. "Elena did reach out. Left a message at my clinic the day before she disappeared. I was at a medical conference in the capital. By the time I returned 3 days later, she was already gone, and the official story was that she had left the town voluntarily." "You couldn't have known," Miguel said gently. "Perhaps not, but I should have questioned the story more persistently. Everyone in Puerto Esperanza has become too accustomed to looking the other way." Her gaze fell on Esperanza. "But this child gives us a chance to break that pattern. Through her, we might finally bring truth to light." Lucia returned an hour later, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Dr. Vargas will help," she confirmed. "He was bar costelli imprec teleclocon, nearsul intrigued by the situation. Said it aligns with rumors he's heard about corruption in coastal development projects. He's arranging for a trusted driver to bring you to the capital tomorrow night." And the man asking questions at the hospital? Miguel pressed. Still there, but now he's showing your photograph too, Lucía admitted. Someone must have connected you to Isabella. The hospital security office has been alerted that he may not be a legitimate official. The news confirmed Miguel's worst fears. Their pursuers were getting closer, narrowing the search. They needed to move quickly, but Esperanza's safety remained the priority. Throughout the next day, they prepared for departure with meticulous care. Lucía acquired a portable incubator designed for medical transport, ensuring Esperanza could travel safely. Isabella organized their evidence and prepared detailed medical notes on the baby's condition. Miguel focused on security, creating contingency plans for every scenario he could imagine.